Pokemon and I have a very complex relationship. Sure, it was one of the first games I played during my early developmental years, but at the same time I've watched it slowly regress into a hollow shell of its former self. So much so that at this point, I'm no longer buying the newer Pokemon titles because I feel like their price doesn't justify the enjoyment I get out of them. Why play the newer titles when I can watch a Let's Play and get the overall gist of a new generation? Why buy a game that I know I won't enjoy? This shift towards presenting a temporary gimmick that usually never carries over to the next games, presenting half-assed challenges and generally making each release easier than the last, started to become apparent to me ever since Generation 5. And I started to fully realize the blatant handholding once I played through Sun and Moon and its 1.5 hour long tutorial. Though the difficulties I faced in previous generations might have just been because I only used to level my starter Pokemon, and the rest of the Pokemon in my party being cannon fodder and HM slaves. So maybe the reason behind me not liking these newer generations is because of the fact that I am smarter and more fully developed. Except I wasn't! Even by playing the earlier games the way they were intended, by evenly distributing experience between all Pokemon, those generations were still pretty difficult even to this day. Needless to say, Pokemon had a rough transition into 3D. So how about instead of talking about the Pokemon games I don't like, let's talk about the one that I do. Mixing two things together can vary in quality. Mayo and ketchup, good. Ice cream and pickles, bad. Tactics-based gameplay and Pokemon, good. I hate describing a video game using two different games. No thanks to journalists describing every game akin to Dark Souls. However, the easiest way to describe Pokemon Conquest is that it's Final Fantasy Tactics meets Pokemon, all tied together using the same themes as the Nobunaga's Ambition video game series. And since I'm both an Asian who enjoys strategy games, anime, and pretty much everything from the East that speaks a language that looks like this when you write it, Pokemon Conquest basically checks off everything I ever need in a game. So the game proceeded to flop. The game didn't sell all that well because of the upcoming Pokemon release, Pokemon Black and White 2, which completely overshadowed this gem of a spin-off title. So I wanted to go back to this game and talk about it here, and hopefully share what I both loved and hated about this game, starting with summarizing the story, as well as giving my own thoughts on a bunch of different game mechanics. Also, I talk about like a sequel that probably would never happen, but you know. Taking a lot of inspiration from feudal Japan, Pokemon Conquest follows us, the player, and our journey towards taking control of all the kingdoms within the Ranzai region. Well, part of me. I was able to put my entire name, so I guess this entire review is going to be given by some guy named PoorDesign. Also, please pretend that this isn't here. I had this game back in 2012, so I still have the box and I don't play the game because I lent it to someone. Please don't kill me. There is a legend in the region that states if someone were to control all of the kingdoms, then they get the chance to get the legendary Pokemon, Arceus. So of course, that means that there's lots of warlords who want to take over as many kingdoms as possible, one we hold being one of them. This prompts us to defend and then launch a counterattack against all of Ranzai, in which we decide to conquer the entire region. Well, justifiably of course, we decide to do this to stop Nobunaga, who plans to conquer all of Ranzai for himself, in order to bring doom and destruction and every other evil-sounding verb that starts with a D. Along the way, we meet new warlords and battlefields before we have to fight against the big man himself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Time to pad time, let's go through the entire story up to where I left off. Holy shit, our kingdom is under attack against... Okay, never mind. This is where we're brought into battle in order to defend our kingdom, where we obtain our first recruit other than ourselves here, Oishi. She starts off with a Jigglypuff. After defending, we do a little bit of training before taking on Ignis, the kingdom that attacked us. It's a fire kingdom owned by Hideyoshi, which we quickly overtake. This gets us into the general gameplay loop of training up our current warriors, battling other warlords, and expanding our territory. Each kingdom is themed around a specific type in order to get us familiar with type advantages and such, but I'm pretty sure at this point, we all know the type matchups so far. Also, I think I started using ×2 speed around here because the battles felt slower than when I actually played as a kid. So some gameplay is sped up around some parts, but hopefully it doesn't take away from the video. We find through Oichi that many are trying to fulfill this legend and capture the great Arceus, with Nobunaga being the warlord who has the greatest chance of reaching this unification because of how many kingdoms he has so far. After taking the Fire Kingdom, next up is the Grass Kingdom and then the Water Kingdom. Afterwards, we're shown 3 more kingdoms we can take on. This is the thing I like about this game. It's good at drip feeding us with new content. Like, if they showed every single kingdom instead of obscuring them, it definitely show a little too much than necessary, especially for a game made for everyone. Now, before I get to the rest of the story, I'd like to talk about the gameplay as well. As shown by the gameplay, it's a turn-based tactics-style strategy game where each player takes turns moving and attacking using their Pokemon. Every Pokemon has 1 move each, which all have different ranges and attributes, an ability, and different stats that determine how good they'll be against others in battle. While most of this seems standard for Pokemon, aside from Pokemon only having 1 move, it also mixes things up with differing warriors and warlords. Warlords also have their own attributes in power, wisdom, and charisma. Along with that, each warrior has a different preference for what kind of Pokemon they like to use. And if you link a Pokemon with a warrior who likes their type, then that said Pokemon's level cap will be increased. Not only does each warrior have their own preferred Pokemon types, they also come with an ability to give their Pokemon or other allies on their team an edge in battle. These abilities can range from buffing their Pokemon significantly for a single turn, buffing them for multiple turns, allowing their Pokemon's attacks to have a chance to flinch, healing status ailments, healing all allies' health, and so on and so forth. Outside of battle, there's also strategy in positioning warriors to defend current kingdoms and developing buildings within those kingdoms. Inside of each kingdom, there's a set of buildings and a range of shops to buy helpful items, areas where you can link with wild Pokemon and recruit new warriors, even mines where you can send your warriors to dig for gold. The main gripe I have about this game is that you can only attack kingdoms with Oichi and your player character within the same party. So you can't make multiple strike teams, which would increase the depth of strategy, as well as help quicken the story from 17 to 20 in-game months to something less. So by now, we've already gotten halfway there, getting the fabled Kenshin and Shingen on our teams, and we learned that Oichi is Nobunaga's sister? I mean, if you look back at feudal Japan history, it would have been obvious, but like, this is a major shock to me when I was the age of 12. Then hey, our Pokemon is given evolution stones, which I don't use since I want a Glaceon. And then we eventually make our way to Dragonor, which Nobunaga resides. Here he waits with the... Is that a fucking Zekrom? Either way, we still win and take down Nobunaga, unifying all of Ranzai. We still have to link up with Arceus. Not gonna lie, giving Arceus this grand entrance feels great. Especially with the underwhelming way many got them in Gen 4. Wow, a spin-off game giving better treatment to a canonical god in Pokemon than in the actual games? That's crazy. Linking up with Arceus, now we literally have God on our side. And then Nobunaga decides to show up and start shit, along with a bunch of other previous warlords we defeated. Like, dude, you already lost once, can you take a break? Oh shit, that's a shiny Rayquaza. They really gave Nobunaga the coolest looking Pokemon, didn't they? Needless to say, they didn't stand a chance. I mean, they got Oichi's Bisharp, but that's about it. Yet again, Nobunaga loses, afterwards telling us why he wanted to conquer all of Ranzai. Because of the legend regarding Arceus, many dreamed of conquering all the kingdoms, and soon only thought of their Pokemon as means to an end. Therefore, if Nobunaga conquered all of the kingdoms, they believed all the fighting would stop. Arceus, touched by how much the both of us care about Ranzai and their Pokemon, leaves the world in our hands to make a better tomorrow. I mean, I was kind of roped into this. I didn't really give a shit. I just wanted to... And then our story ends there. Except that this isn't the end. Yeah, this entire section was just a tutorial. Next comes the 37 other side stories that happen, in which we get to play as the other warlords that we fought in the previous section. Not only that, we also get to see additional warlords that didn't make an appearance before. I mean, it's only 2, but they're 2 of my favorites. And yes, I plan to go over every single one of them. Okay, I think I should like tone it down a bit. Before I get into the side stories, I'd also like to mention some additional changes that they added to this part of the game. For one, the restriction of having the protagonist being required to attack is changed. Now we can attack any kingdom without that limitation, thank God. Second, NPCs can now attack kingdoms not affiliated with them. This puts more strategy into the game because now we can't just dump all of our strong units into one squad while leaving the other kingdoms undefended. Now we actually have to defend against attackers, putting us in the defensive position at the start of battles. More random events happen, such as weather effects that benefit or harm certain Pokemon types. Opposing armies make temporary alliances to take down stronger threats, which are usually me, and even civilians coming up to us to ask for money. And yes, you should just give them money whenever they ask for it because they'll just start wrecking shit. Speaking of money, it also has another use now. Remember how every kingdom had different buildings within them? Now, we're able to upgrade those buildings up to level 3 to increase their effects. My main gripe is that the building upgrades don't save when going through a different story, but literally everything else that matters does. Another gripe I have is with the fact that certain tutorials are prompted whenever we start a new story. Like, I already know what the 3 stats do regarding Pokemon, I don't need it being re-taught to me every time I start a new story. Lastly, the game saves registered warriors Pokemon. So if one character has a certain set of Pokemon, they'll still have those Pokemon in a different story. This is pretty useful since most of the characters that are registered have a head start in base stats compared to their opponents, with their Pokemon being more evolved and generally making the game easier. Those are just some of the things that I wanted to point out before we went fully into talking about the side stories. But anyways, these extra stories can all be categorized by their objectives, and many of them are simply just parts within their own contained stories. For example, the Kenshin vs Shingen story has 2 parts. One where we play as Kenshin, and the other where we play as Shingen. Both lead to slightly different endings, but they're the same story. That's how I'm going to group up these side stories. I'll try to get through them quickly since the stories don't really evolve much. They all follow the same formula of the warlord saying, I want to do this thing, and then you do that thing, and then at the end when there's the ending cutscene they're like, I did this thing, and that's it. I will add extra bits that I do think were interesting during my playthrough within these stories though, so yeah, that's going to be a thing. Okay, let's go. These stories basically revolve around one warlord deciding that they want to unite all of Ranzai by conquering all the kingdoms. Sound familiar? There's 4 of these sorts of stories, all with their own warlord: Hideyoshi, Yoshihiro, Masamune, and lastly Nobunaga. Each of them have their different reasons for deciding to do this Herculean task. Their reasonings for wanting to conquer all of Ranzai aren't really that important since it all just ends up with the same means to an end. Personally, these stories weren't extremely difficult, all things considered. However, I feel like they're much more interesting than the main story. They mostly serve as a more fleshed out version of the introductory story since there's a lot more things put into play that I touched upon previously. Overall, it just gives you another reason to play the game, really. There's a handful of these sections where the main goal isn't to take over every given kingdom, with the Kenshin vs Shingen storylines being a fairly simple example of one of those alternative goals. This specific story focuses on the Kenshin and Shingen rivalry, with us taking control over either of the two depending on which story we choose. The two decide to settle their differences in good old-fashioned Pokemon battles, with whoever wins a total of 5 battles being declared the winner. The map here is divided in 2, with half belonging to Kenshin and the other half belonging to Shingen. Again, I think these 2 parts were easy considering that I piled all of my strongest Pokemon into one strike team to attack a single kingdom. The AI does this thing at the beginning of every section where they simply just don't attack, so I'm free to attack at my leisure while leaving any conquered kingdoms in my possession defenseless. I'm pretty sure that the AI is hard-coded to do this, so that we can train through fighting wild Pokemon, but attacking kingdoms and winning against them is an easier and less time-consuming way to gain experience. Again, more interesting objectives to complete that don't require us to conquer every kingdom. In these cases, it's more to collect 100 Pokemon or 40 warriors. There are 4 warlords whose stories revolve around collecting 100 Pokemon, and only 2 that require recruiting 40 warriors. Not gonna lie, while it offers variation to the standard capture every kingdom type of gameplay, it feels like we pretty much do the exact same thing because of certain circumstances. Since only 6 warlords can reside in one kingdom at a time, plus the fact that each warlord can only carry a certain amount of Pokemon, it means expanding our reign's reach solely to house all of these Pokemon and warriors. A big problem that I think comes with all these objectives is that I tend to conquer all the kingdoms and still fall short of 100 Pokemon or 40 warlords. Though that might be because my playstyle is pretty hyper aggressive as I start attacking other kingdoms frame 1. These stories usually end up with me waiting a few months or so before I actually complete them. I know it's a small complaint that doesn't really matter, but I feel like it's something I should just point out. In this section of stories, it revolves around the younger warlords that will be the successors to the senior ones. They all have to face off in the same competition where they attempt to control all of Ranzai, with the twist being that none of the senior warlords show up at all during this. This means no Kenshin, no Shingen, no Iyasu, none of those guys. It doesn't really change all that much gameplay wise other than not having access to those couple of warlords. Really, it just forces us to use characters we may not have used up until now. There's going to be a recurring pattern when it comes to these gimmicky storylines. I understand the developers were trying to shake up the formula a bit through these changes, but personally, I don't think it changes that much. There's nothing really too special about them, but of course, we get to play more Pokemon Conquest, so that's considered a plus. In Ranzai, they hold this competition to see who is considered the most beautiful warlord in the whole region, by making them fight in Pokemon battles. I mean, maybe we could have held a Miss Universe or whatever, but this works too, I guess. The main gimmick is that all the warriors are women, meaning another restriction as to which kinds of warriors we can and can't recruit. Many of the female warriors share the same kinds of skills as well, being usually restoring HP or removing certain status effects. Also, our main objective is to capture all the kingdoms, but there's only 7 compared to the normal 17. The reason for this is because there's only 7 unique female warlords, which makes these stories a lot quicker to complete. The ninja stories take place on the east side of Ranzai, where the 4 ninjas get into a competition to figure out who is the best of them all, by seeing who can conquer all of the available kingdoms. This section is similar to the previous one, in which it's not all 17 kingdoms, but rather 8, making the stories quicker to complete. As for their gimmick, we can only use poison, ghost, and dark types. Oh, and dragon types. Oh, and literally any other type of Pokemon that any warrior has if we've already registered them in the gallery. Unlike the other stories, I feel like this gimmick is the weakest out of all of them because of how easy it is to bend the rules. Also, Poison, Ghost, and Dark doesn't feel like a balanced type matchup, even if that's what ninjas supposedly use. The type triangle these 3 make isn't all that interesting. Only Ghost types have both a weakness and resistance to Dark and Poison respectively, with Dark and Poison types doing neutral damage to one another. I think that the simple idea of allowing fighting type Pokemon to be used will allow for more interesting interactions, and bring in a pseudo rock paper scissors type of mechanic. Dark being effective against Ghost, Fighting being effective against Dark, and Ghost invincible against Fighting. Plus, I feel like it also fits in with the ninja theme. After all, when I think of a ninja, I think of martial arts as well. There's also Dragon types, which throws everything out of whack because of the one move every Dragon type knows before even evolving, Dragon Rage. This move always does 40 damage, and when everything in the early game has less than 40 max HP, it makes it easier to steamroll through most armies early game. And although that its main drawback is being low accuracy, I never found myself in a situation where that accuracy was a considerable risk. This led me to having my main attacking squadron consisting of as many Stage 1 Evolution Dragon Pokemon, since the reward outweighed the risk. Thankfully, these stories are relatively short, and to access the final story, we only need to complete 2 out of the 4 of them. While taking part in a ninja-themed storyline might seem interesting, I think they fumbled the execution.
His hair, whack. His gear, whack. His jewelry, whack. His footsteps, whack. The way that he talks, whack. The way that he doesn't even like to smile, whack. Me, I'm tight as fuck.
This category has to be one of my favorites because of how short, sweet, and simple the story and gameplay is. In the not worth fighting over category, we're introduced to these 3 friends, Mitsunari, Kiyomasa, and Masanori. Sure, we've seen them in the main story, but they weren't given that much development outside of berating us for not knowing how to play the game. We find out that these 3 are in a fight with one another for some reason, and in order to prove which one of them is correct, they all decide to settle it in... you know where this is going by now. But wait, 4 kingdoms? There's only 3 of them. Well, Oishi's here too for some reason. I'm guessing this is to give us an upper hand in upcoming battles, considering that if we just stayed and trained against wild Pokemon, then we'd be gaining the same amount of strength as the other two guys. Anything to make the game a little bit easier. The upcoming battles only use 4 of the 17 kingdoms and fight on a much smaller scale. By the time I was done with one of these storylines, I think I only had 6 or so warriors at my disposal. However, I feel like these quicker stories are better than the longer ones because they can be played and completed in short bursts. They stay more in line with the design philosophies other DS games had at the time. Shorter completion marks. This way, players could attain a sense of achievement by completing smaller milestones through one play session. These stories get progressively harder as you unlock the other ones, with Mitsunari's being the easiest and Masanori being the most difficult. This mainly boils down to Mitsunari having a Scizor, which beats out both Kiyomasa's Larvitar and Masanori's Skorupi. And while Kiyomasa has at least some edge in battle with Larvitar beating out Skorupi with Rock Tomb, Masanori definitely got the short end of the stick here. He can't even touch Scizor with Skorupi's Poison Jab, and like I said before, Kiyomasa has a Rock Tomb. After conquering all 4 kingdoms available, the 3 friends eventually make up and watch the sun set on the beach together. It's just a nice touch. Wow, I wasn't expecting to have so much to say about a section of the game that only takes about 15 to 20 minutes tops. Maybe it's personal bias, maybe it was just pretty well done in general, I don't know. As the title card suggests, these stories are about stopping Nobunaga's army. In this case, we don't need to conquer all of Ranzai. All we need to do is stuff out Nobunaga within 3 years. For me, this meant that there were still some leftover kingdoms that could have been conquered, but they weren't really necessary for beating the tail. This all had to be done within 3 years, or 36 in-game turns. The time limit isn't very stressful, but I do like the addition of a timer ticking to a preventable doom. All it really did was encourage more aggressive plays, which I've already been doing ever since I picked up the game. There is no map restriction, and there's only 2 stories which fall into this category. One where he plays Mitsuhide, and another where he plays Motochika. The former is a lot easier than the latter because of basic type advantages. Throughout these stories, Nobunaga uses a High Dragon, while Mitsuhide uses Lapras, who knows Ice Beam. Needless to say, it's pretty easy to get the upper hand against Nobunaga as long as we have Mitsuhide. This isn't the case for Motochika, however, because I used him in a previous story, he had a Samurai, but this could be infinitely worse had I not recruited him in the past. Had I not done so, he would have started out with a Soul Oshawott. Another thing that adds to this layer of difficulty has to be recruiting warriors and warlords. Whenever I fought against Nobunaga's army, I was never able to recruit any warriors after achieving victory against one of his squadrons. See, usually after completely taking out an army, the warriors have a chance to join your cause. But because of how large Nobunaga's army was, and due to some other possibilities, many warriors straight up dipped after I beat them. This required me to use up turns in order to garner more warriors through other means so that they could help me defend my empty kingdoms. Overall, this whole section was at least a bit more difficult than the other stories, considering the time limit, Nobunaga's main Pokemon, and issues with recruiting warriors. I'd give it an A+. In this story, our objective is to conquer all 17 kingdoms. The reason why this isn't lumped in with all the other stories where you had to unite all of Ranzai is because it's the actual final story. We start with our player character and Nobunaga, taking on all the other warlords we have fought before in the beginning. In this story, all the warlords have reached their highest rank, all the buildings are leveled up to their max level, and most importantly, we get to fight alongside Nobunaga. This had to be one of the easiest stories to complete, mainly because by this point, we've already registered a good amount of warriors into the gallery, and most of them will already have evolved forms of Pokemon. Not to mention we have the main protagonist and Nobunaga on our side. Literally 2 of the strongest units in the game. I guess the only hard part was linking up with Arceus because in order to do so, our player character has to get 80% link with 1 Eevee. And by the time I'm mostly done with all these stories, most of my Pokemon are either around 45 to 55% link, so it basically just took a lot of grinding. And then after taking over all 17 kingdoms, that's the game. Overall, the extra stories feel a little bit repetitive, but I do understand how time consuming it must be to make 37 separate stories for each warlord. But for what they did, I do feel like it's pretty serviceable. All they needed to do was give us, the player, more reason to play this game, and as far as I'm concerned, they've done that. If there's one thing I've noticed out of all of my playthroughs, it's that there was this snowball effect that occurred through each and every playthrough of a different story. Where at the start of every story I am equal in strength or lesser in strength compared to every other kingdom, but by the end I eclipse each and every kingdom's strength 3 times over, 2 times over, something along the lines of that. However, the gameplay is fun enough that I can overlook most of these flaws that I've seen throughout playing all of these stories. And honestly, I felt satisfied by the ending, despite many mixed emotions that I felt during this entire playthrough. So now let's go complain some more! I mean, I'm kidding, but yeah, I'm going to be talking about every single map. As you can see from the gameplay I've been showing off, there's a variety of maps that battles can be fought on. I'll show off their unique gimmicks and my thoughts on how they're designed. I'm going to try and get through all the non-unique ones before going into the kingdom-specific ones. Of course, this is going to be based on my own personal opinion and how I generally like to play the game. Also, skip over to this timestamp if you want to skip all this bullshit because I don't even know why this is in the script, it's just all unnecessary. So there's a couple of smaller maps where we encounter wild Pokemon to link with and recruitable warriors. These maps are relatively smaller compared to the unique kingdom maps. The size and complexity of these battlefields are also determined by what level they are, with lower level maps being small and simple while higher level ones are much more large and intricate. I was thinking about talking about every single one of them including their different levels, but I feel like that just add more time than necessary. Like, my god, I already know this video is probably going to be my longest one. The only thing you really need to know about these maps is that they're optional. Most of them have good music, and they borrow certain gimmicks from different kingdoms. Aurora's battleground is fairly simple considering it's the first map fought in. The only thing notable in this area is the presence of these logs that litter the battlefield, which our Pokemon can hit and push around. These logs at least give some unique element of strategy since they can be pushed to body block enemies or even pushed into enemies for some damage. The first battle doesn't really incorporate them, but it does make use of them in future battles. There's also trees that can be destroyed using Pokemon attacks, and sometimes they'll have items in them such as potions to help heal Pokemon mid-fight. This isn't a unique stage gimmick though, since a lot of stages also have stage objects that can be attacked and destroyed for certain boosts. It's too bad that not many battles take place here, and even when they do, those battles are fairly quick, at least in my experience. The music here is one of my personal favorites, which is why I hate how quickly battles end here. It really gives off this "my journey begins with this battle" kind of vibe. I give the music a PoorDesign rating of 10 out of 10.
Here, use this!
Ignis' map design here is a little interesting. There are these fire pillars and magma terrain that only fire types can pass through. The pillars can be put out by anything that's super effective against fire too, which adds a bit of terrain strategy. There's also these saunas that heal HP and also heal any status effects, but I never really used them because of how out of the way they were. I also like how when you first fight here, one of the enemies has a Bidoof, and because it's not a fire type, it can't traverse the magma. And this makes the trainer like incredibly pissed off, like he calls his Pokemon useless and shit. I wish more battles had these sort of insults towards Pokemon to further develop the plot in a way that makes sense. Plus, I think it's funny. The volcano that this place is on can also become active after a certain amount of turns. This just means rocks start to fall and hit different tiles. If a Pokemon on one of those tiles is hit, then they get hit with fire type damage. I'm not a fan of these RNG based stage hazards, but I guess they give a little bit of variety to battles. I like the use of drums in the battle theme here too. The whole song is just intense, which can be easily attributed to fire. I honestly just really enjoy this song. 9 out of 10. Greenleaf is most likely the third battlefield most players see, since the game has you fight and win against Ignis in the tutorial story. It's also the first case of a domination type stage, where the objective isn't to KO the enemy's Pokemon, but rather to capture all the flags scattered on the battlefield. The concept is introduced easily enough, and the grass patches that can help your Pokemon travel to specific points help speed up the gameplay a bit. What doesn't speed up the game is the random pitfall traps scattered around the place. While you could probably figure out places where they'd spawn, they're less of something that you can strategize behind and more of an inconvenience than anything. I guess they allow for more quick thinking, but in most cases I just let the trapped Pokemon take a hit since I really couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. Along with that, they also have this bind that extends and retracts every couple of turns. I swear, I have not seen a single Pokemon used for traversal because of how obsolete it is, compared to the more consistent grass patches. It also doesn't help that whenever it changes states, the camera has to go over to it and watch as it does its thing. It really just pads time throughout my battles in this kingdom. They also have these weird grass things that when stood on fling your Pokemon to a random nearby tile. I never really found a use for these things, but they're an okay addition to the level. From the new win condition to 4 unique stage mechanics, I think this stage has too much going on, especially for the ones that show up this early. The music here is pretty common compared to how pissed off I was trying to deal with all these new stage mechanics. Fitting for a grass-based battlefield, and the main melody is also pretty elegant. I just wish the rest of the stage was as good as the music. 8 out of 10.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me. Here too much raining.
There's this little river that separates 3 different land sections, and the water can be shut off using these dams. Water-type Pokemon don't know how to use the dams since they can just walk on the water, so theoretically it's pretty advantageous for water-type Pokemon. Though, I've never really used it to its full capacity. Also, if someone releases the floodgates while there are Pokemon within the emptied river, they'll get thrown back onto shore and take some damage. On the one small island is a fountain that deals water-type damage if you stand adjacent to it, so don't do that. I don't even know why it's there. The AI never goes there, I never go there, just nobody's over there because you're probably going to take damage if you just stand near it. The music is also pretty chill here and fits into the water theming pretty well. Not gonna lie, I feel like someone could do a mumble rap cover over it on SoundCloud or something. I give it an 8 out of 10. Violet stage is an electric based one with tiles scattered around that only electric type Pokemon can move on. The main part of the battlefield is sectioned off into quadrants, all of which have a button within the corner of them. The button activates a switch that electrifies a quadrant diagonal from it, which will hit Pokemon for electric type damage. The electrical grid can also power on randomly, and once on, it starts dealing electric type damage to random tiles, similar to Agnes' stage. I like the stage for how simple it is. There's only 2 stage gimmicks, making it easier to battle here and more manageable. The limited tiles that non-electric type Pokemon can move on makes it so that more strategy needs to be involved when positioning units. The music is pretty good too. I like the use of more synthy sounding tones along with an electric guitar sample to really bring out that electric sounding feel towards the whole area. 8 out of 10.
We have technology.
The Bug-type Kingdom of Cresselia offers one of the more unique stage mechanics of the entire game, the Pokemari. These things basically act similar to the logs in that when you hit them, they move. Unlike the logs, they go most of the span of the map. When a Pokemon is hit with one, they take neutral damage. Also, unlike the logs, they can respawn on the battlefield with a deer scare. Another thing that is brought over from Greenleaf is traps that lock your Pokemon in one space for a turn. These traps aren't pitfalls this time, but instead they're fences that surround your Pokemon in a 1x1 tile area. They do about the same thing as the pitfall traps that are just eating up a turn, so the only difference is their appearance. Oh yeah, and there's also some trees that you can hit for items as well as small ponds on the far ends of the map. Nobody really goes over there since most of the action is in the middle of the map. The music takes on this Zen type feel that is incorporated with all the other unique elements, like the sound of the Pokemari bouncing around, and the deer scare creating a very calm atmosphere. I don't know how this relates to bugs at all, but I like it. Not as much as the other songs though. 7 out of 10. The Kingdom of Pugilist is home to fighting type Pokemon, and its set design reflects that, using a small King of the Hill style map. Its map design is very much reflective of an arena or coliseum with 4 banners on all 4 corners of a small ring. Unlike the last banner-centric battle, Pugilist's ring is different in that the fight doesn't end after capturing all the banners. Instead, you have to capture all of them and defend them for a certain amount of turns. Thankfully, those turns don't have to be consecutive. This leads to fights that can be all-out struggles to see who gets to claim all 4 banners. Your Pokemon can also be pushed off of the ring if standing too close to the sides, meaning that they'll have to climb back up by going on the outsides. There, they can also make a pit stop by these bells that can be attacked and raise their respective team's attack by 1 stage for 3 turns. Overall, I enjoy this map a lot, though I haven't found much use for the bells since the AI doesn't take advantage of them at all, and all of my Pokemon were strong enough as they were whenever I went here. The music's also very bombastic, using a lot of brass instrumentation to give a more strong feeling that's associated with fighting types. Fits the stage and fits my ears. 9 out of 10. The Kingdom of Terra is home to ground-type Pokemon? I never read as a ground-type sort of kingdom, and nor did the battlefield feel it really represented the type. Maybe it would have served better if it were, I don't know, underground? Instead they go to the direct opposite, closer to the sky. The battlefield is one of those banner-based ones again. There are 3 banners and they're all set up on top of these 3 tall towers that you need to use a lift to get up to. Your Pokemon can't stay up there for too long, however, otherwise a gust of wind will push them off and deal ground-type damage. I guess that's how they incorporate the theme here, but it just feels, I don't know. Also, I'd like to talk about how disproportionately weak this kingdom is when attacking as opposed to when defending it. You literally have the upper hand when attacking, because of this wind mechanic being so consistent for the first gust. The enemy AI will always go for the banners first, meaning that they'll get blown off the towers 100% of the time. All your Pokemon have to do is wait at the bottom until then, and then take the lifts after the enemy falls off. I've battled here at least 10 times, attacking 6 times and defending 4, and the defender has always lost. I feel like if the gusts were more random than consistent, then it'd make the battle more defensively feasible, but at the same time I really hate RNG. This is one of those rare instances where consistency is actually a detriment to a game's map design. There's also the trees that drop items and the pools that heal you or whatever. And the pools of water share the same problem with Ignis, being that they're too far away to make any use of. Even the AI doesn't make much use of them. The music here is pretty good, like the rest of the places. Like the rest of the kingdom, I don't really get how it's ground type feeling from it, but overall it's a good song. I feel like this entire kingdom would have been better if it was just like housed underground or something, because man, I really do not know how this is all ground type themed. 8 out of 10.
お前の寿命もあと30分で尽きる。
I absolutely despise this stage. I'm pretty sure that my first experience with this stage had to be on my main playthrough where I had the chance to either fight Shingen or Kenshin. And when I was 12, I was a numbers man and saw Kenshin's army had less strength than Shingen's, so in my head I thought, damn, I should just take on Kenshin because he's weaker. Boy, did I make a mistake. Elucio's battlefield has banners that have to be taken over in order to win. Along with that are floating cubes and portals that warp to the corresponding colors. Honestly, the main features of this kingdom suck. It overall makes for a long and boring defensive hold and an equally long and boring offensive battle. The floating cubes are there to help you traverse from points where the banners are, and that's fine enough. I just wish that they were replaced with bridges because it feels like they are unnecessarily expending a turn that could have been used doing something else. The worst part about this place is the portals. While their positions are fixed, they can change a random color and mess up where you want to go. It would help if the portals only change every 2 or 3 turns so that you could plan ahead, but no. They change whenever they feel like it, making me have to wait an extended period of time for it to go to the spot I desire, or waste 4 to 5 turns trying to get there via the floating cubes. The turn limit of only 20 also hinders this place, making it extremely easy for defenders to stall the battle out and win by default. Like, why does this stage have less turns than Pugilist's stage? The music's fairly good though, I just wish it didn't have to be attached to a nigh unbearable stage, because I feel like it tears down a good score. 7 out of 10. Cragspur is a rock-type kingdom, so likewise, its stage is pretty much just rocks. They have some stone doors that are a one-time activation using switches, and boulders that can be hit and rolled down slopes, hitting any Pokemon in the way. The stone doors don't offer much in terms of strategy. Usually the AI and I would just open them immediately. I guess you could just not activate the switch and let the defenders come to you, but I'm pretty impatient. As for the boulders, they can be pretty useful since a few can go into the small enclosure that attackers start in, giving defenders a decent advantage. The music's pretty good here too. Pokemon spin-offs just have these really good hits, okay? 8 out of 10.
Why won't you die?
The Poison-type kingdom is a unique little indoor area compared to the rest of the kingdoms that mostly have their battles outside. It's another banner battle where you need to capture all the banners to win. The main features here are the pools of poison on the ground, the trapdoors that warp your Pokemon, and the water buckets that your Pokemon can stand in and heal. The poison is fairly self-explanatory, stand in, you get poisoned, but I feel like the AI really doesn't care about it and dives in headfirst trying to get the banners. The trapdoors just make it easier to traverse the map, and unlike Elugio's portals, they're actually consistent and you're able to plan around them, thank God. You already know what I'm going to say about the music, 7 out of 10. The Dark-type Kingdom doesn't stand out all too much, and I think that's a good thing. Honestly, all these maps with their unique gimmicks are fun, but it can be tiring at times. Like, ooh, cracks versus boulders and doors and shit, but at the end of the day, I just want my Pokemon to fight other Pokemon, you know? This stage has an open field with 3 separate pools of water in the middle, making it more advantageous and maneuverable for water types. Other types had to walk these narrow areas where multiple tile attacks are better suited. There's also this roulette kind of thing that happens every so often. It picks a random Pokemon from either team to go into this area where you can pick up items, or it just places them in a completely random spot on the map. Honestly, it can be a little annoying when an enemy you're about to attack just poofs and ends up somewhere else, but it isn't as devastating as other stages' gimmicks. The music here is also pretty chill, but I don't think it's very interesting. I can see how most people might enjoy it, but honestly, it's not really my thing. 5 out of 10. Oh god, what is this map design? Okay, so Avia is a stage meant for flying type Pokemon. Like, flying type Pokemon with high movement are really good on this stage. Thankfully, the AI is more hellbent on destroying your Pokemon rather than stalling, so it's no big deal on that front. But still, if you have a Pokemon that can fly and has good movement, you can stall out any attacking enemy unless they have the same thing going for them. There's jump ramps to get to certain places quicker, and this bridge that opens and closes. Unlike Greenleaf's Vines, I actually use this a lot more because low movement flying types like Charizard can't use the jump ramps. The music here is alright, nothing too special in my book, but that's probably because I heard like 10 other renditions of feudal Japan music within this game. It was inevitable that I was going to end up listening to something and think, yeah, this is alright. 6 out of 10. This stage is agonizing to play on. Honestly, the problem stems from main gimmicks only prolonging the game. While it sticks to the theme of steel types being defensively sound, it only makes it annoying to play through and has to be the easiest map to stall on. First, we have these gates that open and close when a Pokemon stands on a cog. When one gate opens, another one closes when a cog is stood on. This mechanic isn't too bad by itself. If anything, I wish you could completely bypass this mechanic by going around it, but unfortunately, that's where one of the worst mechanics comes in. On certain parts of the stage, there are these cameras that shuffle on a set path. When they see a Pokemon within a 3x1 area in front of them, they pick them up and place them on a random location. It's honestly super frustrating to chase down a certain enemy's Pokemon, only to have them picked up and thrown to the other side of the map. Not to mention the narrow passageways where many of the battles take place. It leads to very samey gameplay where it feels like just 1 or 2 Pokemon hit each other, while others wait in line for the ones in front to either faint or run away. This has to be one of the worst map designs in the entire game, which is a shame considering I like the industrial futuristic look that it brings. The more open and simple maps are more my style, and I think an easy fix for this one is to make the maps less restrictive on movement above all else. Get rid of the narrow paths, make the security cameras a tool rather than a hindrance to the player, and it'll start to look better already. The music helps me feel less angry on the stage though, considering it's pretty chill and uses some nice melodies. Too bad the stage sucks. 7 out of 10. Oh look, on my way to complain about another stage. I swear I like this game. This place has a ghost type theme, who knew? I love the actual design of this stage, like all the spooky and dark tones really fit here. The stage's main gimmicks are having these statues that randomly move to different spots every turn, as well as these ghost spirits that roam around the map and cause random status effects to any Pokemon that get near them. I remember hating the statues as a kid, and while I'll admit they're a bit annoying to get through, they weren't as bad as I thought they were. Of course they can be intrusive and get in the way of Pokemon landing an attack, but I still think that the statues are pretty fair when it comes to where they move. The spirits aren't that bad either. Since they only move at 2 tiles at a time, they're fairly easy to maneuver around, and since the AI isn't cautious about stage hazards, they become the main victim to this. Nothing much to say about the music other than it fits the theme. There is this one part that goes on a little too long, but it doesn't really detract from the whole piece. 7 out of 10.
Oh, I almost just kicked that rock. I'm not gonna fall.
The Ice-type Kingdom is the last one I'll be complaining about. I say that because the only other ones I haven't done are the Dragon-type map and the final map. Ice stages in general get a pretty bad rep, and I think that's because the main gimmick of Ice Theme areas take away a sense of control from the player. Nick Storm does just that, with the main stage mechanic being this giant ice patch in the middle of the battlefield. Aside from that, there's these little ice boats that your Pokemon can wait on, and it takes them about halfway through the patch. There's also these small patches of thin ice that will shatter if your Pokemon wait on them for too long. But they're so inconsequential that I don't think I need to talk about them any longer than this. This sheet of ice is actually hell to fight on when using some Pokemon. Some Pokemon have very specific moves that only hit 1 or 2 tiles in front of them, making it very difficult to aim when they can just go like this. I feel like this map would be a lot more fun to play on if the sheet of ice was cut in half, then replace the rest with like snow or water, something that didn't restrict movement to a straight line. The music here is also pretty good. Again, sucks that it has to be attached to a map that's more annoying than fun to play on. 7 out of 10. Now for a really fun map. Dragnor the Dragon-type Kingdom is a map that's more or less follows a simple path towards each other's Pokemon. The walk down a hallway for a turn or two might seem annoying, but honestly, it makes the encounter a lot more dramatic. Especially since many players first fight here is against Nobunaga. Aside from that, there are these totems that will either attack or heal Pokemon depending on what color they shine. When they shine white, they'll heal adjacent Pokemon as well as cure any status effects. If they're anything else, they'll attack with a corresponding type. Blue for water, red for fire, green for grass, and yellow for electric. Out of all of the gimmicks, I think this has to be my favorite one just because of how simple and easy to understand it is. Not only are there moves that can complement the totems very well, such as certain moves that push enemies into totems to deal extra damage, but abilities as well. Lightning Rod and Flash Fire benefit via an attack bonus when hit with electric or fire type moves respectively, and these totems only help to exploit that advantage. The music is also grand and intense. This map combined with this music delivers a strong finish to the main story. 10 out of 10. This battlefield is only seen like once, and that's only in the main story. I mean, outside of doing like extra stuff that would probably take a lot of time. But I still like to review it. It's a fairly simple map design, that being a large square when your Pokemon meet the enemies at the center for an all-out fight. No gimmicks, no mechanics, it's just a match to see whose Pokemon are stronger. And this place doesn't have one theme, but two. One where you had to link with Arceus, and one where you had to fight against Nobunaga. Both of which I give a 10 out of 10. Man, I just really talked about 17 different kingdoms in a niche DS game, huh? I like to say that there's more stages that I enjoyed than I hated. Overall, they provide a pretty good lineup of stages to fight in, with the variety helping making sure fighting doesn't get stale all too quickly. Okay, back to the, summary or something, I don't know. Pokemon Conquest as a whole still really holds up to this day. The unique idea of putting Pokemon in a tactics-based kind of game was up my alley, and it looks like I'm not the only one. While the story is average at best, I think that this game really didn't need a strong one anyways, considering how good the gameplay was. Though I did pick up that most of these stories are at least somewhat grounded in reality, making it a real treat for those who really know some history about feudal Japan. For example, Hideyoshi appears in Viperia in the main story. While that seemed confusing to me as a kid, I learned that Hideyoshi married Nene in real life in Japan. At the end of Hanbei's storyline, he starts coughing, which I found to be an unnecessary detail until I searched him up on Wikipedia, and oh, he fucking died to sickness or something. Not to mention all the unique art for each and every Pokemon. They could have easily reused the sprites for each Pokemon when looking up info on a certain warlord, but instead, they all have a nice piece of art in their place. I think this also justifies the lack of the complete list of Pokemon up to Generation 5. There are only 200 Pokemon in this game, but I think that saying there's only 200 Pokemon downplays the Herculean task that they have to do for each Pokemon. I'm speculating how they do things at Game Freak now, but I'm pretty sure that's a lot easier to move pre-existing Pokemon from generation to generation, considering all they had to do now is reuse the same 3D models they've been using since Gen 6. In Conquest's case, they don't have such luxury. For each and every Pokemon, a new asset had to be made. Sure, there could be a template for certain parts, but still. Look how many individual sprites are needed for Kadabra of all Pokemon. Now multiply that work by 200 and add the fact that they need to have some sick-ass art portraits. Not to mention, The fact that every unique warlord has 1 or 2 Pokemon that form a perfect link with them, and thus show up on the screen whenever they start talking. This means that some Pokemon have even more art of them showing off different states of emotion to mimic their warlords. And even I haven't touched on the fact that all of the warlords' designs are extremely well made. I think they meet that middle ground between realism and anime aesthetic, if not leaning more towards a more cartoony side. And I love how their evolutions from ranks increases their likeness towards the Pokemon that they have the most affinity to. Overall, I feel like the art and designs are something that shouldn't be barred to a simple spin-off title. Why don't we have more of this in the mainline Pokemon games? While the gameplay can be considered simple from a quick glance, it can have a lot more depth when interacting with every facet of the game. Towards the end of the game, I found myself actually trying to strategize not only in battles, but also in developing my army and kingdoms. Which warriors would be most advantageous for me to use for mining? If I attack this kingdom and win, which warlords would I move in order to help defend the now open one? It's deep and requires me to use my brain. I love it. I've already talked about the music in this game. It's good and you've been hearing it throughout this entire video. And the instruments hold true to the period. At least 95% of these songs are objectively good. Anthony Fantano will be proud. Sure, there are some things that are holding it back, such as gimmicks and gameplay that slow down the game to a crawl, and how only Pokemon are able to use one move. However, despite the game's shortcomings, I think that it only slightly detracts from the whole game experience. It wouldn't be as horrible to sit through watching a vine grow and regrow over and over if I wasn't playing it all in one sitting on a soft deadline. This game is meant to be played in shorter bursts, with the player only being intended to complete half or even 1/4 of a story at a time. Had I played this as the game was intended, I'm sure that minor inconveniences like the game feeling slow and certain gimmicks lengthening tasks wouldn't have been much of a bother. This game was a good chunk of my childhood, and thankfully I had good taste. I remember seeing advertisements for this game on television and also reading about it in Nintendo Power magazines. Needless to say, I wanted it. It's such a shame that such a good game receives such relatively low sales and numbers in comparison to other mainline Pokemon games. And truthfully, I don't think that this game is ever going to get its own sequel, as much as I, and a lot of other fans, want one. That doesn't mean it's impossible though. The Pokemon Conquest fanbase is ravenous from what I've seen. There's even a small wiki page for someone's idea of what a Pokemon Conquest 2 would be like. I swear to God, if this release date isn't just like a prophecy or something, I'm gonna be so fucking mad. And I've even done a bit of thinking of what my ideal sequel would look like. So, here it is. Alright, for a sequel, I'd like to see a bunch of changes. For one, I want multiple moves. Even the addition of allowing Pokemon to have one extra move would add a lot of depth, since it doesn't even have to be a move meant for attacking. Stat-changing moves such as Tail Whip, Hone Claws, or Howl, utility moves like Teleport and Stealth Rock, are all just a few moves that I think could be added to the game. There's so much more potential for battles with the addition of one more move. Let's say that you don't add any new moves, but add an extra move slot. Even then, it could offer up so much more variety by giving Pokemon more type coverages. Quagsire could use both a ground type move and a water type one. Bisharp both a steel and a dark type move. Giving Pokemon a second move can also add a sense of progression when further developing links. Maybe Pokemon can learn an extra move before their first evolution, since it usually takes quite a while in game to actually evolve certain Pokemon. I'd also like clearer conditions for evolving certain Pokemon to avoid having players look up that information online. Honestly, I wouldn't have known how to evolve Eevee into a Glaceon if I hadn't searched it up, and that problem seems to persist for a handful of Pokemon in the game, especially the ones that need to be traded in order to evolve. Like for example, Girder. In order for Girder to evolve, they have to hit a Pokemon, make that Pokemon KO, and subsequently have the warrior that owns that Pokemon be joined into the battle, all the while having a 60% link. Like, doesn't that feel a little bit excessive? Speaking of trading, I'd like warriors to be capable of trading Pokemon with each other. It would be just an easier way to get every warrior's preferred Pokemon, and make it so that evolutions could be handled a little bit better. Possibly. It wouldn't even hurt if you needed to have a certain building to conduct trade. If it had to be a certain level, if there were restrictions or whatever, just make it happen. There's also my numerous complaints about stage mechanics that really don't work. I'd say make the gimmicks speed up the game rather than slow them down, since there seems to be a lot of features of stages that only serve to stall battles and slow them down. Make there less RNG based gimmicks across the board, such as Illusio's portals or Velora's cameras, and make ones that are more consistent that players can work with to strategize. Also, cutting down the gimmicks to either 1 or 2 for every stage could help. If not, then at least make the stages have more mechanics compared to others towards the end of the game when they're more easily digestible. More variety when it comes to early game Pokemon would also freshen up the start, because after a while it's easy to keep on seeing the same Pokemon over and over again. Though this has to be because of the limited roster. Only having 200 Pokemon will do that to a game that goes on as long as this one does. Which brings me to my next point of adding more Pokemon. Even if the developers think that task may be too daunting, then they can use some shortcuts like cutting each Pokemon's unique gallery portrait or reusing 3D models from Sword and Shield. I genuinely wouldn't mind if they cut corners like reusing assets from other games if it meant that we get a sequel. All in all, these new features that I'd like to be added would be enough for me. I love this game, and I felt like I needed to air my opinions to give it even the slightest amount of attention. So please, buy it. Or get an emulator for it, but you didn't hear that from me.